So there seems to be a lot of interest in how Darkseid became Darkseid, with people reading DCKO and Darkseid trying to conquer all of creation and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to talk about that. There is a caveat to all of this that I will bring up once we get towards the end of this video. But for right now, this initially opens up in an alternate reality, and we end up picking up with these people who are basically just kind of toiling the soil. Life is harsh. Now, one of the other cool things you're going to notice here is this has a lot of parallels with Gore the God Butcher, just because of the fact that these stories were introduced very closely to one another. But it is also important to specify the story of Darkseid is ancient. It goes all the way back to Jack Kirby's Fourth World, so it's not one of these things where like one brand is copying the other or anything like that. But the way the story unfolds is we're told that there was a mud grubber named Uxas who could not wait for everything to hurry up and die. But the bigger issue here is that they largely curse the old gods, right? Because in their mind, the old gods don't care anything about their race or people in general. In the midst of all of this, there is a massive storm that starts to take place. And that's where Uxas ends up running to Isaiah and Avia, telling both of them to take cover. Now, Isaiah will become a very important part of the story here in a little while. Avia is actually how you segue into Isaiah becoming so important. But that's where Isaiah just says, "Great Father, right, hear our prayers. You blessed us with life. Do not take it from us." And of course, Isaiah says, "We know our imperfection offends you, but we love you with all of our hearts." And Avia comes back in and says, "And we beg your mercy." So clearly they're believers, right? They truly believe in the nature of the old gods, and they pray, believing the old gods will either bring them sustenance or provide kindness to them or something to that effect. Uxas does not. And in fact, he curses the name of the old gods. And he even says that, right? The old gods do not care about us. And that's kind of what happens. The old gods manifest here. They walk across the ground. They destroy things around them, right? They dance and they have fun. They love seeing the struggles of those beneath them. I wouldn't go so far as to say that they are malevolent in the sense that like they are inherently evil, but you could make a credible argument that they are, because they seem to find enjoyment in the destruction in those that they deem to be lower than them, and to see their loved ones killed and the things they've built destroyed. And so it says, "The mortals in their dirty fields screamed, and the old gods laughed and laughed and laughed." And all the while, it pisses off Uxas more and more, to the point that Avia says, "Spared, gods, we thank you." And Uxas just says, right, "Shut your stupid mouth." And of course, Isaiah responds, right, "Thanks to your sister's prayers, we live. Show her respect." And in turn, Uxas strikes Isaiah, right, strikes his brother-in-law, and says, "If the gods actually heard your pitiful prayers, they would have crushed you just for fun, and I wouldn't blame them." So there's a lot of anger and a lot of rage built up in him due to a lifetime of living this kind of existence. And Isaiah just says, "Uxas, do not blaspheme. You will bring disaster upon us." And in turn, he looks to the kingdom that the old gods reside in and just says, "That's not a bad idea." And so it says, "So brave, wicked Uxas climbed the forbidden mountain and stared down on the great creators and destroyers of all he knew. No one knows what gave him the power, but when the gods sleep, nature sometimes produces a sport. Every world has one: the snake, the beast, the trickster, planting doubt and hate in even the purest of souls." And so the old gods went to war. So quite literally, he incites a civil war among them. Now, what the comic leaves out here and other future iterations have thrown in was this idea that he basically seeded doubt in the mind of the gods that other gods wanted to destroy them, right? So you need to destroy them before they destroy you. And so that's why they all end up going to war in the first place. And it says, "And the mud grubbers wept as the world exploded." Now, in the face of all these elder gods fighting one another, right, these old gods destroying each other, Darkseid starts to steal their power. And it says, "And then there was new darkness. And one of these elder gods of the earth, right, looks to Darkseid, or looks to Uxas and says, 'Little man, give me a prayer.' And so he responds kind of cynically, and he says, 'You feed on faith.' And that's where the god says, 'Believe in me, worm, and I will give you all you desire.' And so Uxas says, 'Forgiveness, but I think I'll just take it.' And so we're told, no one kills a god and gets away with it. The beast sank deep its fangs and drained its masters of all their might. But what if you kill 2 or 10 or all of them? Goodbye, Uxas. Enter Darkseid. Now, here's one thing that we have to do here. There is a moment to interject right between when Uxas starts absorbing the power of all of these guys and when he becomes Darkseid. And the reason why I say that is because at this point, we jump away from Justice League 23.1 and we pick up with Infinity Man and the Forever People. Now, one of the things that I want to specify about all of this, right, is that this is all technically part of what was originally considered Jack Kirby's fourth world. And if you don't know what that means, when Jack Kirby left Marvel and went to DC Comics, he started building all this out, right? The idea of Darkseid and Apokolips and all that kind of stuff, right? Highfather, New Genesis, the whole nine yards. That was all originally supposed to just be its own story over there somewhere. And in fact, it wasn't supposed to tie into anything that DC had going on. But when Jack Kirby left DC Comics and went back to Marvel Comics, he basically abandoned the fourth world in the middle of it all, right? He didn't really wrap anything up. And so what DC Comics did is they took the whole idea of the fourth world and they rolled it into DC Comics proper, which is why now Darkseid is a villain of pretty much everybody across the multiverse. And the fourth world is all a part of the main DC universe. But the reason why I bring all that up is because Infinity Man and the Forever People was also originally a fourth world title. And so what ends up happening is when we jump to that story, we actually jump to a moment between when Uxas had killed the old gods, but before he became Darkseid and taking all their power. And what we're told is that it was the moment forever known as the final day. It was remembered in song, and it was remembered in prayer. Children wore costumes and reenacted scenes of battle. Grown men threw themselves on the Promethean wall as a form of penance. Every new god knew this day, and each handled it in their own way. This was the day Highfather and Darkseid proclaimed themselves new gods. This was the day the gods of old were no more. This was the day Yuga Khan died. Now, here's the cool thing. We do get an explanation about the nature of Yuga Khan. He has been around in DC Comics for a very, very, very long time, but what he does is he addresses Uxas and Isaiah, and he says, "You treacherous dogs, I have called upon every power there is and ever will be. I stand here defending all gods now and old, and I promise you, as long as I stand, there shall be no new gods." Because once you actually jump to Isaiah and Uxas, they look the way they did before Uxas became Darkseid. And so he just says, right, have at it, brother, right? I killed them once, but I need your help to kill them all again. And Isaiah just says, Uxas, right, this is your war. You brought this on us. There was no need for any of this. And that's where Uxas says, that's where you're wrong, Isaiah. The need is mine. This is my destiny, and I will not be denied. And that's where Yuga Khan says, so the child believes it's his destiny to take my place and lead the greatest race in all the multiverse. And he says, boy, you are sorely mistaken. Inside me rests the anti-life. Once before, I released its power and a universe shuddered. Today, you will experience its full might. And he says the anti-life reanimates the gods you murdered. I am their vengeance, and they are my army. And he says, Isaiah, my firstborn, I would have chosen you to lead. Instead, you have forsaken me. And he just says, no, right? I was foretold the time of the old gods had passed. The universe must move on. It must be led by many, not by one. And Yuga Khan tells him, I taught you better than that. Do you really believe your brother will share power with you? And the response of Uxas, he says, Father, that's not for you to decide. You've turned your back on me one time too many. And in that moment, he kills Yuga Khan. Uxas kills his own father, right? And he just says, I will enjoy watching you die. And so when that happens, that's when you jump back to Justice League 23.1, because that's when he starts absorbing the power of all the old gods around him. And that's when he becomes Darkseid. Now, the cool thing about this is that it doesn't stop there, right? At that point, you jump to Isaiah, and he just says, hold on, wife, right? Because Avia was basically caught in the midst of all of this. And she just says, it's too late, right? The earth explodes at my brother's touch. We are lost. And he says, no, right? Look before you. Lord of the sky, protect us and save my wife, the most devout of all of your creations. And the Lord of the sky tells him, silly mortal, my time is over. And neither Isaiah nor his wife are willing to hear that. And in fact, she says, "No, Lord, you are the creator of all we behold. You cannot die." But that's where the God says, "You're wrong, little one. Today, you and I will pass together. But you still have faith. So as I go, I pass one final blessing to the one you love the most." And so the sky god uses what's left of their power and turns Isaiah into Highfather. Now, here's the cool thing. For those of you guys who don't really know this mythos, Highfather and Darkseid are really as much representations of concepts as they are literal gods, which is to say, Highfather represents the concept of goodness, and Darkseid represents the concept of evil. But it's also kind of like these human depictions of each, which is to say, just because Highfather represents good does not mean everything he does is good. It simply just goes towards what he considers to be a greater good. But I think the better way to describe Highfather isn't so much that he is a representation of goodness itself. That's more or less the popular definition. I would say he really represents more of the antithesis of Darkseid. He is the opposite of everything that Darkseid is. Now, whether you would classify that as good depends entirely on you. But when he arrives with the power of Highfather, right, this whole new level of power that he never had before, Darkseid addresses this, and he says, "Worm pretending to be good, but you stole from the old gods too." And that's where Isaiah says, no, right, these powers are gifts. We are the new gods. We could do anything, bring back those that we've lost, mold everything anew. But the issue here is that everything Isaiah says, right, everything Highfather says, because he preaches the idea of goodness, because he preaches the idea of hope and the idea of restoring the things they've lost, it drives Darkseid insane to the point that he actually obliterates the entirety of the world. And so this is one of those classic examples where it illustrates the fact that Darkseid has almost kind of joined the dark side of the Force, if I'm going to use a terrible analogy here, right? Anakin Skywalker. His darker road has dominated his fate, and he can no longer go back to the person that he was before. And even if he could, why would he want to? Because what it says is silence closed, a deep, long silence, wrapped in massive darkness. It was this way for an age. And then apocalypse, where laughter has been bred out of the species, where every soul silently marches in step, where everyone feeds the machine. But even here, nature occasionally produces a sport. My name is Kaiyo, the Chaos Bringer, and I am bored. Now, here's one of the cool things to know. This is actually going to segue into a really dope moment in the history of Darkseid. But more so than that, when it comes to Apocalypse, one of the biggest misconceptions is that Apocalypse is a world that is really only inhabited by Darkseid, Granny Goodness, Granny's female Furies, Darkseid, Steppenwolf, and Parademons. No, there are sentient beings that exist on Apocalypse. They're all from different walks of life, and there is a kind of ranking system that's there, but it is a hellish world. And so Kaiyo continues on, right? She says, "No one here does anything without the master's permission, but when I poke the parademons, they forget, and they fight. Discord, my gift and my curse, and so much fun." So basically she's Loki, right? She says, "But then I make a mistake. I laugh, and Darkseid hates that. But then something unexpected happens. I teleport. Quite a surprise. He doesn't really like that very much either. And after so many years of total domination and control, he's going to kill me. But it's all worth it. After all, it's not every day you surprise a god." And what ends up happening is that in this moment, Darkseid kind of tears an opening through space and time in the hunt for Kaiyo and discovers Earth and the Justice League. And it says, with an entirely new universe he never knew existed, and shows him a champion with powers that rival his own. And of course, if you are Darkseid, if you encounter something so gorgeously unexpected, you kill it. And so Darkseid, in turn, launches an attack against Earth. But he really only does this in an effort to chase Kaiyo. Because Darkseid tells her, right, "That's right, Kaiyo, run wherever your strange power takes you." And Kaiyo says, "And so I do. For what seems like eons, I was born for chaos. So when I breach realities, I instinctively find the worlds that will give him the most trouble. But world after world he finds and destroys, until this one. I know it doesn't look good. In fact, it looks pretty terrible. But before I led Darkseid here, I tested these heroes. They're younger, rougher, crazier. They're never going to give up. And she even says the weakest of them all is insane enough to think up a way to free his friend, who's strong enough to keep even the great Darkseid at bay long enough for the cleverest of them to tap into the machine that you created to follow me across dimensions. And so now you are done, my lord, stuck right back on Apokolips where you started. You've lost. Now, here's a thing to explain here, right? What we're talking about with Darkseid fighting the Justice League directly, this was the origin comic for Justice League because this is all the New 52. And so this is the first time Darkseid invades Earth in DC Comics when DC launched the New 52. And so that's when Superman is captured, Superman is brought to Apokolips, ultimately he's rescued by Cyborg. New 52 Justice League was pretty dope, and I feel like a lot of people crap on it unnecessarily. It was a great run, especially when you get to Darkseid War, which actually has an adjustment to all of this that we're going to talk about here in a minute. But one of the things that happens, right, is that when Darkseid is back on Apokolips, he just says, okay, Kaiyo, right, who else but you could think to defeat me? I was so like you in my day. You know my mind. But then again, I know yours. So I knew exactly how to use you, always letting you live, following you from world to world, seeing what new presents you bring me. In short, please accept my thanks. And that's where Kaiyo says, I know that this time he's finally going to kill me. But instead, like the old gods he hated so fiercely so long ago, he laughs, and I will run and run and run. But as cunning as I am, I cannot escape the wrath of a mad god, and neither will anybody in creation. Now, here's the kind of caveat that I wanted to toss into all of this. So while the origin of the new gods has kind of shifted to a degree within DC Comics, which is to say the Godhead storyline, right? The new gods one-shot as part of Jeff Johns' Green Lantern run. For the most part, it all kind of revolves around this. The big change as far as Darkseid's motivations, both for invading Earth 2 or sending Steppenwolf to invade Earth 2, as well as Darkseid himself for invading Earth Prime in the New 52 reality, that whole change was removed away from the idea that he just wanted to attack these universes because he just wanted to conquer them, right? And he wanted to be able to stop anybody out there that could threaten his rule or anything like that. And it was because he was looking for his daughter, Grail. And that's what led into the events of Darkseid War. That was the huge change. So I know a lot of you guys who are familiar with the history of Darkseid in the New 52, going into DC Rebirth and all that kind of stuff, you're like, wait. This doesn't make any sense. How does Grail fit into all of this? At this point in time, Grail hadn't necessarily been introduced, and I don't necessarily know if we really even have to cover it in this tidbit. We can do something about her if you guys are interested, and of course, again, I have the entirety of Darkseid War, which you guys are welcome to check out, which covers the whole story of Grail, right? The actual daughter of Darkseid and so on and so forth. She's one of those characters that DC kind of wasted as time went on, but the fact is, this is actually how Darkseid becomes Darkseid in DC Comics. So, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.